All right, so we're back in the shop here, and it's obviously another day. And after doing some testing with the mock-up I have here of one of the hinges, I realized that I probably need to design out their exact placement. And what I discovered is I have enough room to put about a 10-inch shelf up here, just because I made this so tall. And I'm gonna have about a 4-foot or 4-inch bottom footer down here before the bed comes down, and I can show you that in SketchUp. Anyway, let's get to modifying this to the new locations and finish up both sides and make our bed frame.
Now, in order to make our metal frame, I did bring my table saw outside just because there was going to be a lot of sawdust, and I cut out at least the 2 side supports for the bed frame. I then went about making the bed frame itself, which are 1.5 by 1.5 inch square cuts, and I found a bunch of scrap that I had outside and I cut them all down to size. Again, 1.5 by 1.5 inch, and these are all 8 foot long, but I'm going to cut them down based on the size that I need on the chop saw inside the warehouse. Just cleaning up here with the vacuum. It's really dusty, so I didn't want to do it inside, even though I have a dust collection or dust filtering system, but it doesn't work that great. So I am setting up the frame. I did measure it out, and I only did supports about every 16 or so inches, kind of like your basic framing. And I used finish nails to hold everything in place, and then secured them with essentially 2 screws in every corner to keep it rigid, and then 1 screw for each of these middle pieces. You'll also notice I used a piece of scrap, a 3/4 inch plywood, to raise the surface, and that way it was easier to screw in parallel and not at an angle. I also put a diagonal brace in between after measuring off to make sure that the entire piece was square, and put that diagonal brace in, shot some finish nails through to keep it rigid. Now, the side walls of the frame, I rounded off using that orange Home Depot bucket to make a radius, and that is so when the frame goes up and gets pretty close to the top of the shelf, there is no rubbing or scraping. The radius helps prevent any collision between the 2 pieces of the material. I also kind of forgot about the back and ran out of material, so I had to make it out of 2 separate pieces, and then I used the Craig jig or pocket holes to put those 2 together. And that side is not really like structurally significant, so it's okay to have a little bit of a weak point in the middle. Everything got screws all around the frame, so all of our taller pieces, about every 4 or 5 inches, I put in a screw, and that made it super rigid. I also used pocket holes to secure all the corners of the framing itself. I then went and put it into the outer shell, and I lifted it up about 1.5 inch off the floor to set my pivot point. Now, originally in the design, I was going to have a smaller shelf, and then have about a 4-inch kind of baseboard, if you will, at the bottom to make the entire structure more rigid. I got rid of that because I wanted to actually maximize the space of the shelf at the top, and to do that, I had to drop everything down. So there's actually only 1.5 inches of clearance at the bottom, which is perfectly fine. But that allowed me to have a 12-inch shelf at the top, which is much more useful for pillows, blankets, cat food, which happens to be in my shelf right now, so that's what we're using it for.
Well, I am halfway through the hardest part, which is setting these brackets along the outside wall and my bed frame, and I think I've got the right measurements to make this thing work, and it's perfectly going to allow this back corner. It will not touch this back brace. It'll come right up. Check this out. Only got 1 hinge in. I don't want to break anything, but look at that. See how it comes right out? I've only got 2 bolts in, but now I know my measurements, so all right. Now, there is an issue of tolerance, right? The spacing in between. I'm gonna have to shave like a 1/4 inch off on this wall, and then a 1/4 inch off on this wall. So it's gonna make my plywood a little bit weaker in the most important section. I really didn't want to do that, but I actually didn't make this thing wide enough for these brackets. These brackets are kind of beefy, but that's okay. I'll get the router out. We'll do a little bit of routing, push this thing over, get these things reinstalled, and then I can go ahead and do that side. All right, let's do it.
You know, not every project is perfect, and this is definitely something I was doing trial by error. So what you'll see me do is set up right now the first bracket on the left side. I measured everything out and then took the brackets off so I could figure out how much needed to be routed out. And that routing ended up being about 1/4 of an inch on each side. So here I'm just testing the left side bracket to make sure that it's rotating properly. And the fisheye lens on this camera, this GoPro, doesn't really show it that well, but the legs are bowing out because I'm putting a lot of pressure on them. And so I used a 1/2-inch router bit and this little Ryobi router that I have. And I just kind of marked everything out and did my best to route out about 1/4 inch on the bed frame and 1/4 inch from the sidewall where it connects. And actually a lot of material had to be routed out. And this is where I realized having a battery operated router is not the best thing because it runs out after like maybe 3 minutes of use, which made this entire process take like 3 hours to do all the routing, just because there was so much to do and I only have 2 batteries and they're cheap knockoffs. And so maybe lesson learned, either don't get cheap knockoff batteries or get a corded version, which I'll probably do later. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now and let the time lapse speak for itself and just take care of the rest of the video. So just watch and enjoy the music. What I will say at the very end now is casters are amazing, so you should definitely add them to every project that you have whenever you're working on them. It makes it so easy to move things around. Stay tuned, like and subscribe for part 3, where we finish up the rest of this Murphy bed build. Catch you next time.